very happy and privileged to have this kind of occasion, to have a person of such magnitude, such integrity. The reason I say this is in history there are people who choose to stand for justice and they pay price for that. And there are few, not everybody chooses that. And to stand with oppressed people who are always has been subjugated, under oppression, persecuted, is not easy. It needs somebody's conviction from deep in. So I don't want to go into details. Haftamu will introduce the event or the night. I'm simply welcoming all of you, and before all, I say to Claire Beston, welcome to Oromo Center. We are very happy, we are delighted. What you did for, not only for Oromos, for humanity, for justice, for people who are standing for integrity. So we will want to see many people like you who can speak for those who are voiceless. Thank you very much. Welcome, and Hautamu will introduce, and after that we're going to
Nagada. I'll switch to English. So hello everybody. I would like to thank Claire Beston, Ethiopia researcher and Eritrea researcher for Amnesty International. As Obabara already mentioned, she's a very significant woman. With her team, they produced reports of major significance for the Oromo people and also for the region. And the first time I ran into Claire Beston was 2012 at an event organized by the Oromo Community Organization of Washington, D.C. And she was talking about the human rights abuses, and specifically the massive human rights abuses related to the Oromo people. And I was part of the panel, and I realized from that moment that she stands for something great against every kind of challenge, every kind of disparaging remarks that might be thrown at Amnesty International, as well as to herself, from people and organizations who are opposed to stopping Oromo stories from being told. So she's important because she is breaking the silence on, and her team are breaking the silence on the sweeping, as the report calls, repression of the Oromo people in Oromia and in Ethiopia. So today she's here to speak on Because I Am Oromo, a sweeping repression in the Oromia region of Ethiopia. A report that was released, a 166 pages report. I read it personally. I personally believe that Claire Beston is my personal human rights hero. I don't know. I would like you to appreciate her and give her a standing ovation for the Thank you very much. Without further ado, I'm just going to give the mic over to Claire Beston, Ethiopia researcher. She's going to speak for some minutes, and then she prefers a Q&A approach at the end. And I'll give the mic to her. Thank you so much, and we would love to hear from you.
Thank you. Do you mind if I stay sitting down? Yes. Thank you. They've had a long day. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much, both of you, for your very kind words. And I think you're all sort of aware why I'm here and what I'm going to talk about. I can obviously talk about this issue for as long as you want me to, but I do think it's nice also if we do questions and answer responses, and you know, we listen also to your input, and it's not just me talking the whole time. So if everyone's happy with that, then I'll I'll go through the main findings of the report for maybe 20 minutes, something like that, and then we'll open it up for questions, if that's okay with everyone. Mm-hmm. And obviously, as Hab said, it's a very large report. So even in 20 minutes, I'm not going to cover all of the aspects at all, and I'm very happy to talk in more detail about certain things if you want me to. So, you know, just stick your hand up in the question session and ask me to talk more about that. So I'll talk about the main findings, but also as a starting point, I'll say why we chose to look at this issue. In the 4 years I've been doing this role, I've had quite a large focus on freedom of expression issues and the way the government of Ethiopia responds to suggestions of dissent or manifestations of dissent, in which we include the political opposition, as well as the independent media, human rights, civil society, peaceful protests. All of those issues I've been looking at for the 4 years that I've been doing this job, as well as in previous work on Ethiopia. The government's hostility to dissent is something that affects the whole country, and certainly I think has gotten worse in the years since the 2005 elections. But we thought there were indications that it happened at a greater level in Oromia, and also that very often the government's reaction to it was more preemptive in Oromia. I've worked with Oromo issues both in this job but also in previous work that I was doing before this job. So I was quite aware of many of the issues, but I found that other people weren't, and that there was a great need to have the sort of patterns of repression that were happening in Oromia properly documented for the first time in really quite many years. So that was the starting point, to look at the patterns of how repression is active in Oromia. So if you haven't read the report, which I expect many of you haven't because it is really quite long, the first half of the report is looking at the kind of people who are targeted in Oromia based on either the manifestation of peaceful dissent or just the suspicion that they hold dissenting opinions, but they don't support the government. Within that, the number that we had that we could definitely confirm was 5,000 people arrested between 2011 and now, based on either their actual political opinion or the suspicion of their political opinion, that they didn't support the government. That figure of 5,000 people is just the cases that we know of. It's certain that there are more than that for many reasons, because there aren't human rights organisations functioning in Ethiopia, because there isn't much independent media remaining. These things aren't being reported. There's not proper documentation of detention centres, numbers of people who are in detention. A lot of people are held in unofficial places of detention, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so there's not proper documentation of that. So it's certain that there would be more, a higher number. That 5,000 figure is just the ones that we know about. So 5,000 people who are arrested either based on expressing peacefully dissenting behaviour, which would be mostly peaceful protesters and members of opposition political parties. But in addition to that, we had hundreds of cases of students who were arrested, and hundreds of cases of people arrested whilst engaged in some sort of expression or celebration of their Oromo traditional culture and heritage. Outside of those four groups, there were just people from every walk of life, which included teachers, business people, medical professionals, all sorts of other people who were arrested just based on the suspicion that they didn't support the government or the manifestation of some behaviour that was interpreted as not supporting the government. Just to give you a few examples, There was a student we interviewed who prepared a business plan for a competition at university, and he won the competition, but then he was arrested on the accusation that the business plan was underpinned by political ideology, because it was in Oromia and because the language of the business was in Afan Oromo, and he had refused to join the ruling party, added up to the fact that he therefore must support the OLF and the business plan must be in support of the OLF. So he was arrested on that basis. There was a teacher who was arrested because he refused to teach his students in high school the achievements of the EPRDF, and therefore it was concluded that he must not support the government and therefore must support, again, the OLF. There was a midwife who was arrested because he delivered the baby of a woman who was married to someone who was suspected of supporting the OLF. So he was arrested. So there were these degrees of separation and reasons for why people were arrested. If you didn't join the ruling party, in many cases that was a point that made you fall under suspicion, that then either that in itself would lead to arrest, or if something else happened, then that was the basis of the arrest. A number of people inherited suspicion from their parents because their parents had either known to support the OLF or were suspected of supporting the OLF in previous years, and therefore their children were assumed to also support the OLF. So all of these different reasons that were vague, different degrees of vagueness, and very often were just people exercising their rights to freedom of expression, to political opinion, to freedom of association, but being arrested on that basis. The accusation of OLF support was frequently repeated in many of these cases, but was never actually substantiated because the majority of people we interviewed who were arrested were never actually charged with a crime. They never went to court. They didn't have any kind of trial process. So that accusation was never actually proven. So what we found were the very extensive use of arbitrary detention, where the detention is not subject to legal process. People aren't charged, they're not taken before a court, they don't have access to a lawyer, in many cases don't have access to their family don't know where they are throughout the duration of their detention, which may have been a few days, many weeks, many months, or even many years in a lot of the cases of people we interviewed. As I mentioned, a lot of those people are detained in military camps across the region. We had at least 25 named to us as places of detention. And people who were detained in military camps almost never had access to any legal process. Within all detention centres that were reported and documented within this research, which included local police station, federal police station of Makilawi and Addis Ababa, federal prisons and military camps and other unofficial places of detention, torture was reported across the board, very often on a repeated basis. And there's quite a large section in the report about the use of torture, about different methods of torture that were reported from different locations across the region, the same methods of torture being used, and the same patterns in why and when torture is used in detention, which is very often earlier in the earlier stages of detention. And almost always, although, as I said, in most of these cases people don't go to court, nevertheless, they're tortured to extract a confession of guilt from them, and sometimes to extract information either about the things that they're accused of or the things that other people are accused of, or to extract information incriminating other people or names of other people who were involved in whatever alleged offence. A lot of these detentions, because they're not subject to judicial process, because people don't have access to lawyers and family members and things that are required under Ethiopian law as well as international law, add up to the category of enforced disappearance, where the government doesn't know about the detention. And so many people who we interviewed had themselves been subjected to detention that amounted to enforced disappearance but then had been released. But also in many cases, there were people who'd lost a parent, a family member, a spouse, a sibling, because they'd been arrested and they never heard from them again and they don't know what happened to them. And that was something that came up very frequently. The final major category of violations that were documented within this were what are called extrajudicial executions or state killings. which happened in three main contexts. One was in the context of peaceful protests, where security services responded with either excessive force or unnecessary force, the use of lethal force, such as live ammunition, being fired on peaceful protesters. The second context in which state killings were happening were during arrests of people. Again, all of this was within the framework of people who had actual dissenting opinions or were suspected of holding dissenting opinions. So there was excessive use of force by security services in making arrests, and suspects themselves and sometimes their family members were killed in those situations. And the third one was in detention. The third context, the main context, was in detention, where there was either deaths as a result of torture and conditions and denial of medical attention that may amount to a state killing, or where former detainees reported that other people they were detained with were executed while in detention. That's going through very quickly the main categories of violations and the findings that are covered in this report. I can talk in more detail about any of them. I'm very happy to do so. At the end of the report, there are quite a large number of recommendations that we make as Amnesty International to the Ethiopian government, to donors of the Ethiopian government, and to the international human rights community. To the Ethiopian government, there are recommendations on all of those sets of rights about where steps must be taken urgently and substantively to address a range of different human rights problems in Ethiopia. But we're also making recommendations to the donors of Ethiopia on a number of areas, but particularly where they're funding institutions, including the police, the military, and the prison systems, in which violations are happening, or within the structures of which violations are being perpetrated. Those donors need to be exercising their own due diligence reviews and investigations to ensure that their money isn't funding violations or going to the people who are perpetrating violations. And then thirdly, under the international human rights legal framework, not to get too technical on you, there is language that requires, first of all, the Ethiopian government to investigate every single allegation of torture, every single allegation of state killing, but also where mechanisms within a country are not adequate in terms of independence, impartiality, access for victims, the protection from repercussions for victims, where they don't exist, then the international human rights community has an obligation to also investigate. So we are also calling on the Human Rights Council, which is the human rights body of the United Nations, and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is the human rights body of the African Union, to conduct their own investigations, to initiate some kind of a initiative or a mechanism to conduct investigations into violations in Oromia as well as in the rest of Ethiopia. I think I went through that very, very quickly, but we can expand during questions, and I welcome any questions, and as I said, I'm happy to talk about any aspects of the report in more detail.
International media organizations really jumped on this report and covered it in detail, so I please understand the significance of this, and if you have any comments, encouragements, questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you very much. Another hero joining us. I'm a torture survivor. I'm one of the living testimonies to the criminal acts of the, I say the TPLF regime. I don't use the EPRDF because I know all my torturers were speaking Tigrinya, and I'm very glad Mr. Abu Asrat is here, and that there was an Afar guy while we was in the Chalama bit, they call it Chalama bit. There were different kinds of levels of prison. There is an extremely dark place where you cannot see anything. there is a room that has no windows, but you can have some light. And I was in the third stage where you can see the outside, and they call it Chalamabet. But I have been in the darkest one. Mr. Gabru Asrat was speaking about the violence in Afar. And there was an Afar guy imprisoned in the Chalamabet with me. And there was, I remember a song at that time in Afar. He has a radio, Guta, Guta. It was a very amazing song. It says Guta, Guta. What does it mean? It means stand up for your right. He was captured with Frenchmen while working for the Afar people. Just to make it short, last June, Task International gave us an opportunity, another hero here. Thank you, Andrea. Another our hero from OSA, the Oromo Studies Association. And we have to learn to thank our leaders. Bolube, who has been tortured for me during Haile Selassie. I'm so great you gave us a space here. Without your sacrifices, we couldn't have an Oromo Center here. We have to appreciate our elders who have sacrificed for our cause. And thank you very much. And Amnesty International, the International Crisis Group, and the UN Convention Against Torture gave me the opportunity to talk for 20 minutes. And thank you very much.
I just wanted to thank you for this tremendous groundbreaking work, for the care, the thoroughness, the respectfulness that you were able to achieve. The tone of the thing was extremely well done, and I really appreciate it. It's groundbreaking work, and when ground is broken, then there's something that needs to be done and planted and continued from there. So I have two questions. One is, could you give us a little more information about what it was that the Oromo community did, because many of us have been working for decades to try to bring these issues, which are very long-standing and deeper than anyone would believe, to the attention of the international community. We've come up against ideology, we've come up against incredible barriers. So was there any particular thing that caused this to be done now? Was it report protests, what of all the various efforts that have been made, what brought this to the fore? And then as we start to go forward, to plant to follow up, can be dismissed, this morning was dismissed as hearsay because all these interviews were done outside the country. They couldn't, it wasn't on-site interviewing.
Yeah.
All the reasons we can document why this is not done on site and what has stood in the way.
Yeah.
What are your comments about going forward from here? There are many people in this room who are highly qualified, very motivated, have connections, but are here for the same reasons that you've documented.
Yeah.
Where, in terms of next steps within the bounds that you have working for Amnesty, what would you recommend?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.